The WWF has nothing on NASCAR. We'll be swatting our way through sales and why some brands don't have enough models, while others have too many.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone. Your journey, our passion.
This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy, episode 265 for November 7th, 2014, taking a SWOT at NASCAR. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time or 2300 GMT. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or by following the links on our website. Hey, Gary.
John, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good. Good to see you.
Yeah, good seeing you too.
Boy, 2 weeks in a row. This is something.
We got something of a streak going.
That's
here.
right.
So we got to let everybody know we got Joe White from the Wall Street Journal with us, Scott Burgess from Motor Trend. Great having you guys here, too.
Good to be here.
So who saw the NASCAR race on Sunday? Did any of you watch that?
Not I.
You watched it, Gary.
And F1. It was a big day in Texas on, to see Rick Perry start the race in Austin. I thought that was, he gave the trophies. That was
Austin.
In Austin, yeah, because it was the
And do you know
US
who the
Grand
last
Prix.
big dignitary on stage giving out the F1 trophies was?
This week?
No. This goes back a month ago. The last F1 race before Texas, before Austin, Vladimir Putin.
Oh,
well.
Did he have a shirt on?
He did.
Perry had a shirt on, so I mean,
Yeah.
it was
The funny part was once those drivers get the magnums of champagne, anybody on the winner's stand is fair game, and you've never seen Vladimir Putin hustle off a stage so fast in your life.
Oh, he wasn't.
As when those guys got the champagne.
Yeah.
So the chase is turning into fisticuffs, huh?
Well, yeah, so I didn't watch the races, I said earlier, but I did read up about it, and it does seem like NASCAR is just trying to turn itself into international league hockey or something, and I don't know that that's a good look for.
Well, that was our line promoting this show today. In fact, I went to a hockey game last night, and a NASCAR race broke out.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem to suggest that the NASCAR as an institution is fighting some headwinds, as they like to say in the auto industry, and it'll be interesting to see if fisticuffs exactly is the way to go. Certainly separating themselves in terms of their brand identity from, say, F1, right? I mean, it's a very different direction.
They don't like it. They don't like these fights in the sense that they fined two of the crew chiefs $50,000 apiece. They fined a couple of crew members $25,000 apiece and kicked them off the teams for the rest of the season.
So the governing body, so to speak, is
the governing body
control.
They don't mind people screaming and throwing helmets at cars and stuff, but when you start throwing punches and landing them, they don't like that.
Yeah, just for people who didn't see this, since we're sort of talking about it like everybody on Earth knows what it is. So it was Jeff Gordon and Brad Keselowski, and
Chevy and Ford.
Well, and so going into that race, Gordon was in first place
in the
championship, and they have this new regulations set up whereby you have to aggressively win in order to stay in contention, and so Keselowski made a move which punted into Gordon. Everybody says it was but everybody says it was a racing move. I mean, it was just that space was there and he took it.
He went for an open slot. Gordon tried to come down on him. I've watched the replay many times just to make sure. Gordon came down on him, and the two touched, and it cut Gordon's tire, and he was out.
And he finished 20-something.
And he went apoplectic.
Yeah. And so I think that's a good thing for old guys, though, because that Jeff Gordon now is one of the old guys in the series.
He's one of the old guys, right?
Well, I just think that NASCAR's, it's opportunistic marketing. Fans like it. They're going to show it as much as possible. I mean, NASCAR hasn't been leading SportsCenter in a long time, and first thing you see Monday morning is the fight. And
some harmonic conversions of NASCAR and cage fighting. Right?
Yeah, and so I don't think it's going to get any worse, but it's not like they ran over anybody and killed them.
True. That's true.
Yeah, which
Dirt track racing.
Right, which is a pretty bad place to be if that's how you're defining the behavior in a sport.
Well, you know, Keselowski drives for Roger Penske, and Roger is a guy who, you know, really likes everybody to mind their P's and Q's and doesn't want to upset sponsors and anything like. He was 100% behind Keselowski and what he did. So I think that sort of sets the stage as to certainly who Roger thought was at fault in that accident, and he didn't think it was his driver.
And how much do you want to watch the next race? You know, I mean,
Right.
so
But do you want to watch the next race for the driving, or do you want to watch the next race to see if anybody could kick somebody else's ass?
yes.
Yeah, I suppose that's it. They had some.
Oh yeah, hey, we've got it up on the video screen right now. Here's the fight breaking out, and it's a good one.
And these guys are so small. This is actual size on the TV that you see.
That's right. But yeah, this was on every newscast, not just sportscasts, but newscasts, and still being debated, as we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. So this goes into the same. You know, if you spell my name right, it doesn't matter what you say about me. And if you say my name, it doesn't matter what you say. I mean, these folks need a little shot in the arm, and maybe this is it. But it does seem like kind of maybe a second choice way to get back on, as you say, back at the top of Sports Center.
Well, and you know, I mean, it's always interesting. F1 holds this within the auto industry. F1 is the creme de la creme, and think about what NASCAR has done for the auto industry. I mean, it's done a lot of things, and I think maybe even 5 years ago there was this sense that it was moving away and it was just star-centered and it wasn't brand-oriented anymore. But I mean, I don't think F1 is that much more brand-oriented, and really F1's done a lot for German car makers, whereas you would say NASCAR's done a lot more for the American car makers.
Yeah.
But what's sort of interesting is that while all this is going on with NASCAR, that Formula One is in the process of going broke. And I saw this interesting quote from Bernie Ecclestone in Autosport. Bernie Ecclestone said, "The problem is there's too much money probably being distributed badly, probably my fault." and you know, and that guy is not one
would know.
to, you know, I mean, and he's not one to be self-effacing. And then the other thing is that they're talking about, you know, somebody was talking about the possibility of a three-car team, because most of these NASCAR, Formula One teams are two cars. And Ecclestone, again, quote, "Forget third cars, nobody can afford two cars."
Yeah.
So Autosport had some numbers. Mercedes, they estimate, is spending $540 million on their Formula One team. Ferrari, $440 million. And Red Bull, $385 million. And so you've got these teams like Caterham and Marussia are just like...
They're out of their league.
They can't do it. And they're saying, you know, how can you
well, you know, but
race and
right.
win?
You know, he doesn't distribute the money fairly, and that's why I say the NFL's got all kinds of problems, right? But they share the wealth. Otherwise, you would never have a NFL team in Green Bay, Wisconsin. You would probably not even have one in Cincinnati and Buffalo.
Or Pittsburgh,
but they spread the television
Right.
money. And that's what F1 should be doing, because it's ridiculous. You know, we're at the point now where realistically 3 teams can win a race in F1. And it's just stupid. They need to spread the wealth and make a lot more teams more competitive.
And if 3 of those teams are both Mercedes. Jam 1NB points out that two cars are the regulation for Formula One, so you can't have 3 cars. But who could afford it?
Right.
Yeah, well, and from at least in terms of the manufacturers, because you see the manufacturers go in and go out. I mean, they're one serious downturn away from having even some of those stalwarts, you know, rethink what they're doing.
So is Honda going to be there for long, or because they're supposed to be coming back?
Yeah, no, they're coming back next year. They've already shown their engine, and they're going with the McLaren team. And you know, when Honda puts its mind to it, it usually stays in for the long term. You know, there's got to be some horrific other business reason elsewhere in the company that they go, oh, we can't spend $500 million on F1 anymore.
Well, it seems like if you want to have, in Honda's case, because I mean, Honda is probably one of the ones where I've actually had some experience in talking to people about why they do that or why they did do it. And you know, if Honda can really use it as a training ground for their premier engineers, which they used to do back in the day.
Right.
fine. It seems like that adds value to the business, makes perfect sense. But if they can't do that, then it's sort of like in a company their size, why do they bother?
Right.
And what are they going to get out of it?
No, but you hit the nail on the head, I think, Joe. That's how Honda looked at it. They've never looked at it as primarily a marketing effort. It's been primarily a technology and engineer development program.
Yeah, which I always thought was pretty smart. I mean, for a company in their situation, I suppose the other guys use it the same way, but it seems like, look, I mean, I'm not a big racing fan. Let's just admit that right now. It's I think probably pretty obvious to our listeners. But the thing that I'm puzzled by with all of this is the enormous amounts of sums of money that are spent by these car makers. And everybody has to know that NASCAR Chevrolets aren't real Chevrolets.
Right.
Formula One Mercedes aren't real Formula. Sorry,
No,
Gary. Santa Claus. Let's talk about that offline. And so, and maybe especially with NASCAR, it sort of seemed to me like, what is the point of all this from the point of view of the brand? I mean, everybody knows it's not even a stock. It's not a stock engine. It's not a stock car. So what's the point of it? And so let the emails flow.
Yeah, right. So, Gary, you had suggested that we do a SWOT analysis of what's going on with different car companies and brands and models. And SWOT, explain.
Well, so, okay, this was the big sales week, so we had the sales announcement. And so usually on the show, after the sales come out, we basically just talk briefly about what some of the sales were for some of the companies. And so I thought, well, maybe an interesting thing, because we have Joe here, who certainly knows the business upwards, sidewards, downwards, and every which way, and Scott with Motor Trend, who has probably driven everything on Earth and probably in some planets as well, that we look at the sales numbers from the point of view of what do we see in terms of strengths, what do we see in terms of weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the companies, okay?
Hence SWOT.
SWOT, yeah. So, okay, so we'll start with Chrysler. Okay, so we look at Chrysler, and it seems to me that their strength was Jeep, up 46% for the year, and just doing great guns. And so, how do you see their product line?
Their strengths right now is the Ram. The 1500
You think Ram more so?
Yeah, and they've gotten a lot of mileage out of the EcoDiesel, which I think is a phenomenal.
Green car of the year, your truck
Just
of the year.
today, they named it the Green Truck of the Year. And in testing we've actually gotten pretty close to the EPA 28 miles per gallon in an empty truck. That's phenomenal. These trucks are 5,000, 6,000 pounds. And to get that kind of mileage, we're waiting for that pickup to break the 30 miles per gallon. And I think that the Ram is a really good weakness or strength, and all of the Jeep lineup is
that new Cherokee, that we all made fun of the styling about,
right,
and
me too.
I'm eating crow, man.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
putting
selling.
Tabasco sauce and forking it into my mouth.
Yeah, it's selling.
It was a vehicle that my sister bought.
Yeah.
And
Hey, I had one last winter with Blizzak tires on it. That thing was awesome in the snow. I was blown away by how good it was.
Yeah.
But their product weakness to the other side of that are cars.
Cars, yeah. So they're down. The 200's down 22% for the year. 300's down 9%. Dart's down 5%. Charger down 3%.
Well, the 200, that's a little bit unfair because a lot of those are that there's a model changeover in there. I think if you look at the most recent sales of the 200 for the month, they were good.
11,675.
But what was that percentage change?
Up 40%.
Up 40%.
But that doesn't fill the factory up.
No, it doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't fill the factory, and I agree. I think Chrysler's done a really, really good job with the Ram truck. They're just running circles around GM and Ford. Now, Ford is hard to evaluate because, of course, they're kind of in shutdown, but they've certainly run circles around Chevrolet up until sort of now in terms of positioning that truck, coming up with variants that hit certain sweet spots in the marketplace, promoting it, the whole 9 yards. Yes, Chrysler. But you look at Chrysler's profit margins relative to Ford and GM, and they're way less. And I think most of that has to do with cars. A lot of that, I believe, has to do with the Fiat brand in the United States.
Another thing that I heard
not a strength at all.
That I thought was very interesting is Chrysler has less vertical integration than GM and Ford, so it's buying more components And part of the profit margin that does not show up on its bottom line is because that profit's going to suppliers.
Of course, we go back to the days of Tom Stallkamp, that was a virtue to be less vertically integrated.
Well, they're all less vertically integrated than they used to.
Right,
but I mean, you're probably right.
Sure they are. But, you know, especially when it comes to things like transmissions, axles, and stuff like that, if you can build that in-house, yowza, you know, you really do help your margins.
We got those two big transmission plants in Indiana. So
You know,
They do.
All of Detroit, their weakness right now is cars. The top 20 selling vehicles in the month of October, 2 were American cars. Japanese, and there were 6 other cars in it, but none of them, you know.
So how do you turn that around? What would you do? How do you get, you know, especially Chrysler and Ford, they've got a passenger car problem.
I mean, I think some of that starts right at the dealership level where, you know, that you could buy a $30,000 car or you could buy a $30,000 crossover and look at all this other room, and that the dealer's push is into all of the trucks from the very beginning.
And crossover.
Of course, you know, if I'm a salesperson, I'm going to make a bigger margin selling you an F-150 than I am some passenger car.
And, you know, I think the quality of cars, at Ford, I think the quality of the cars are pretty good. And at GM, too. GM, I mean, the Cruze was one of the top 20, and Ford was the Fusion. Thank you. And, you know, I think the Impala is a good car. I think that but those are also in segments that are shrinking. They're getting smaller. Fewer people are buying those vehicles.
cars or sedans or
Cars.
Just cars across the board.
You know, and you know, the things like the Mustang. Mustang's a great car. It's never going to be a 200,000 unit a year vehicle.
Not designed to be.
No, it's not. But you know, I don't know that. I think that the Cruze has done really well in the compact segment, and the Fusion or the Focus has not as well. I mean, it's still doing fine, and I think that they make money on it. But
so how come they can't sell passenger cars? These are good, like Scott's saying, these are good cars.
Well, first of all, I mean, this is, you know, the durability of the brand strength of Honda and Toyota is a remarkable thing to behold, and that's part of it. So, I mean, honestly, I don't think a Toyota Corolla is a better car than a Ford Focus or even a Cruze for that matter. You know, sort of spec for spec, feature for feature. But they have a really durable brand image in that segment. I also agree that the Detroit 3 are not weeping great big tears about selling crossovers,
absolutely.
SUVs, you know, Chevy Suburbans and trucks and getting their people.
That's a good point. Crossovers are the new passenger.
They are. I mean, if you look at, I mean, I know we're all here in Detroit, but I'm going past Buick Encore after Buick Encore after Buick Encore, and yes, I'm in Detroit, and yes, I know most of those might be employees, but nonetheless, those employees did not buy the Sonic or some similar size compact car. They bought the Encore. The other problem, which I think we were alluded to when we were chatting offline, is that with gas prices in the heartland of the country at $2.99, and even on the coast,
I paid $2.78 the other day.
Yeah, this is going to become a sport. Is, you know, how low can you go? A lot of consumers, especially I think the domestic brand loyalists, are saying, look, you know, I don't have to squeeze myself into a tiny subcompact. I'll buy something else. And so they're buying the crossover versions of the
cars,
the Fusion. I mean, the Fusion. The Fusion. The Focus. The crossover version of that is the Escape. People are buying Escapes or competing in, you know, compact crossovers. And again, I think if you administered truth serum to top executives at Ford and said, you know, how broken up are you by this trend? They would say, we're not broken up at all. Are you kidding me? We get more revenue per vehicle.
But this comes back to the SWOT analysis, right? Isn't this a threat, Gary? Because, sure, gas prices are cheap and probably going to go cheaper.
Right.
But at some point, they'll come back up. How much? I don't know. But they'll come back up.
Sure. So, you know, you see whether these guys have opportunities to make a shift somewhere else. So let's say for the argument that, you know, cars are not selling. Okay, so if we look right across the board, I mean, isn't there a possibility that some of these guys might be able to make some more dough going forward by having very compelling cars? And you'd be happy.
what do you mean?
Well, okay, so if we look at the situation at Ford. I mean, Ford's strength still is F-Series. And that's not going to change. I mean, it's only going to get better. And even if they don't do well, they're still kicking everybody's ass. I mean, even though they were down 620,000 units, I mean, there's nothing that's in that stratosphere.
But I think I would say in answer to what you're saying is if as long as Ford is, and I know this is their strategy,
Hey,
is flexible and
quick,
go
because we're going to a break.
Focus if needed or escape if needed, then they're fine.
Good. Look, we're coming back to this thought because we're going to take a break right now.
I was wondering why the music was kicking on. I was like, wait, is that my...
All right, so who doesn't think this sounds like Wild Thing?
What's that?
Wild Thing?
Yeah, it sort of kind of does.
Introducing a car company that's never made a single car. Legendary durability. Impressive mileage. Firestone tires. So unstrap the saddle, 'cause these old stallions are ready to run. Again. Whatever you drive a Firestone.
And thank you, Firestone, for supporting this show. Really appreciate it. Yeah, going back to this whole car thing and how do you get it changed around, what part of my SWOT analysis that Gary had suggested that we talk about today is looking at Dodge. You know, because Dodge is now pretty much all passenger cars with the exception of the Durango and the Journey. But the Dart just doesn't, I mean, if you're going to say this is a performance brand, the Dart doesn't fit. So for my SWOT analysis, I say axe the Dart, bring it back inside, massage it a bit, and spit it out again as a Chrysler 100. You know, Chrysler brand only has 3 models right now. It's incredible. 2 cars and a minivan. That's not nearly enough. And then take that Dart and turn it into a hot hatch. Make it a world, you know, a WRC, World Rally Championship kind of. Do something. Do something.
Sort of like the Caliber was?
Well, the
SRT?
Caliber was, that was a El Cheapo effort.
Right, but I mean, wasn't that basically what they had thought of?
But now spend the money and do it right. Don't try to do it on the cheap and fool people. You can't do that. The market's too competitive. But, man, I think Chrysler needs more models. Dodge, if they're going to be serious about being performance, axe the Dart or change it into a hot hatch.
It seems like the right thing to do. And on the other hand, you could say they should invest all of their money in Jeep and Ram and just keep pouring it on. I mean, if there's a variant in either of those brands that they haven't thought of, they should get to thinking about it and invest the money in that, because that's where they're going to make the money. You're right. I mean, they risk being caught blindsided again by a switch in the oil markets, but, you know, it seems like that's not likely to happen.
Yeah, I don't think it's likely to happen.
Although, you mentioned this on Autoline Daily about the John Krafcek and TrueCar with this analysis of where companies are making money and where there are gaps in what companies do. And it sort of seems to be in line with what Joe's saying about, you know, like take your money and put it where you've got some real good return possibilities. And do you think that this plays into that? If you could explain what Krafcek was talking about.
So Krafcek at TrueCar has divided the market very simply into 4 segments: passenger cars, utilities, which includes crossovers, pickups, and premium/luxury, let's call it. And then instead of counting who sells how many vehicles in each of those segments, he says, how much revenue does it generate? And he does this very simple graphic showing each car company with how much revenue it generates in each of these 4 segments. And you can see, as we've been talking about, Chrysler is real weak in passenger cars, but super strong in trucks and utilities. Volkswagen Group, because remember, you got to include in the U.S. market, Audi and Porsche. Super good at premium, not too bad at passenger cars, but they suck at truck and utilities. So he says, when you start mapping this out, now you can start to see from an M&A, merger and acquisition standpoint, where it makes logic to put companies together. So he's saying FCA, Fiat Chrysler, should really merge with the Volkswagen Group, or the Ford Motor Company should merge with the Volkswagen Group.
Not Mercedes?
Not Mercedes. John only looked at the major manufacturers.
Oh, okay.
You know, he didn't, break down into Mercedes and BMW.
Well, so in the case of Chrysler, he says that Chrysler in total makes $66.3 billion, and of that money, 12.7 billion cars, 17.2, pickups, utilities and van 34.9, and premium 1.5 billion. So basically, if you look at cars, which is 19%, and premium, which is 2%, it doesn't even add up to what they're making in pickups, which is 26%. Right. And then the utilities and vans, which would be the Jeeps, 53% of everything they make.
Well, so, right. If the auto industry was just sort of a game of risk, and you were just like, you were playing, or cards, where you were putting cards together, yes, it makes absolute sense for Volkswagen to acquire FCA and absorb quiet and dispose of quietly the car making business of FCA and replace it with their own car business, which is perfectly fine. And finally get the North American truck and sort of global sport utility exposure that they so badly need and openly wish they had. They would love to be in the pickup truck business in North America, and they can't build it. They have to buy it. So that all makes perfect sense on paper with a deck of cards. As we know from watching fiascos like Daimler Chrysler, the very same company, as we know, that is not how it really works. There's all this human illogic that goes on. But yeah, on paper it makes perfect sense.
All right. So what if the guys in Auburn Hills just say, we're not going to merge with anybody, but we're going to push more of our chips over into Jeeps and Ram pickups?
I think that's kind of what they're doing. I think that's what Sergio's product plan is about.
I think you want to. I think that lots of things keep you out. Cafe keeps you out because you need to have all of these other things going on.
Not so much anymore, because now it's a footprint-based cafe.
Right.
I mean, you're right. You still have to have a fleet average that looks good, but it's not as critical as it was.
No, but there's still, but Chrysler is, I'm doing this off of kind of memory without the sheet in front of me, but Chrysler doesn't have as many CAFE bonus points in its bank by as long stretch as any of the other companies. And their flexibility, if they don't overachieve in the car segments, their flexibility to sell larger vehicles that underachieve is reduced. So there is a competitive aspect to it, and I would predict that over the next several years, it's going to be a growing tension around CAFE and the disconnect between the CAFE standards and sub $3 a gallon gasoline.
5 years out, it's going to be trucks all of a sudden get impacted. This first section of CAFE has really been more car oriented, and when we see 2020, when all the truck specs start really tightening up from 2020 to 25.
Yeah, but remember, there's what they call the midterm review in 2017, where all the parties are supposed to sit down and say, does CAFE still make sense? And what I'm seeing now is the environmental lobby is trying to turn CAFE into a CO2 argument, because they see this coming too, and they don't want to see any back off whatsoever. And it's going to be real interesting to see how this gets resolved. Politically, I say it's impossible to back off CAFE.
Well, there's the headline number, and then there's what actually happens.
Right.
And those are two different things.
Right.
I mean, even now they're two different things.
Credits that you can get on the side and loopholes.
And they could become really two different things, perhaps. But I do think that there's a lot of tension, and obviously, we've probably talked about it on this show before. Over the next couple of years, it'll be interesting to see what happens to things like the aluminum F-150, to the increasing use of exotic materials, even in some of the premium brands where, you're going to have sort of price ups around that. Interesting to see how much more room Tesla has to run selling, sort of a premium, exotic with electric car. At what point do they run out of people who say, yeah, I can afford a $100,000 car that runs on batteries? We'll see.
All right, before we jump on Tesla, which we will, I want to ask you, Scott. You were talking about the Ram and with the Eco Diesel engine, and and it seems to me that the big threat that these guys face is the aluminum F-150. Do you think that that'll take some people away from the Ram?
I don't know. You have that initial fear. I've doubted Ford before, and I was wrong. I really never thought that there would be such acceptance of twin turbo V6s in pickups. I thought that people would say, nope, I want a V8, and they didn't. Ford is close to 700,000 pickup trucks that sold this year, and when the aluminum one, I think they've done a really good job of creating a buzz all around it. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, people are going to have an expectation of higher gas mileage, so Ford has to deliver that. and I don't know if it has or not. But
if it does, if the EcoBoost engine turns out to be in the aluminum truck, the same sort of or better, because I think they'd have to beat Chrysler, right?
Right.
Or Ram, sorry, to do that. And so, do you think that will then take away some?
The one thing about the pickup market that's really interesting to me is the loyalty is just incredible in that. Unlike cars, when Japanese companies really took over the car business in the late 80s and early 90s, as they had this stalwart reputation. When Toyota came out with that new Tundra, they really thought it was just people would buy it because it's Toyota. Well, a guy that's been driving a Chevy for 50 years and has never had a problem with his Chevy, he's not going to go and buy a Toyota because it's a Toyota. He's going to buy another Chevy. And so the loyalty of the trucks is
strongest in the business.
Yeah, and it's because they're all really good trucks.
And it's why it's kind of remarkable that Ram has gained as much share as they have in this last year. I mean, they've moved the needle, and Scott's right. It's hard to do in the pickup segment. So they're doing something right there, and
I think Chevy stalled a little bit.
They did.
Is that because of the redesign of?
I think that the exterior never felt like it was.
It was hard to tell the new one from the old one.
Right, and so there was some people that you have that 15% that aren't loyal.
Right,
and
gravitated.
And lots of people that buy Tundras they love Tundras, but at the same time, it was. At one point, when Toyota was first coming out with the big Tundra, it was expecting to be, by this time it would be selling 400,000 trucks a year.
Yeah, they built a gigantic plant down in Texas on that expectation.
But here's what I think Ford's got to do with the F-Series is emphasize payload capability. Because I was talking to John Krafchick about this. A Dodge... there I go. A Ram 1500 4x4 diesel, I want to say has an 800-pound payload capability, which is nothing. I mean, you put 4 big Americans in the truck and you're at payload capability of that truck. Mm-hmm. Whereas with the aluminum, what Ford has actually done, sure, it's a fuel economy play. They've automatically increased the payload capability of the trucks by taking 700 pounds out of it.
And so I'll say the magic. So they, and I think they've done a pretty good job. I thought they did a really good job of marketing the EcoBoost in this way. They marketed it as a performance thing. And yeah, they talked about fuel economy, but they really talked about performance and torque. The whole Dennis Leary torque is what takes the top off your beer, and I mean the whole thing. They were very smart about that, and I assume that they're going to be smart about it this time. The market's changed. When they started thinking about doing this truck, gas was going to be $6 a gallon or whatever. We come to today, and it's half that. So I'm sure that they're busy in retooling whatever ad campaign they thought they were going to do to emphasize payload, performance, acceleration, huge trailers and all the rest of it. So,
and you could see a jump in pickup sales as gasoline prices go down. When all of a sudden somebody goes, I wouldn't mind having that pickup.
Well, think about it, because every penny that a gallon of gasoline drops puts $1.5 billion into the economy.
It's a stimulus program.
It's a massive stimulus program.
So isn't there the possibility that the aluminum F-150 comes out and suddenly you're able to buy a Chevy truck or a GMC truck for pennies on the dollar?
Well, the other side of that is that Ford has the aluminum doubles down on the full-size truck, whereas GM has diversified its portfolio with the Canyon and the Colorado. Mm-hmm. And I really like that truck. I think it's really nice. It's complete, and you can get a $23,000 base model work truck for Colorado, and it's a really nice truck.
Well, and the problem there, so you talk to people at Ford about that, and they say, we've studied this market up, down, and sideways, and our conclusion is that if we brought out a nice Ranger, a modern Ranger, all we would do is cannibalize F-Series sales.
Right.
And we would get people, as you say, to buy. I've driven that truck. I agree with you. I think Colorado is a very, very good truck. And it will certainly surprise people who are used to what that size of truck used to be in this market. But for $23,000, $24,000, $25,000, $26,000, you can get a nice truck that for most people is actually big enough. And you're not going to spend $35,000 for the Silverado. So look, I love it when companies that have done the same thing in lockstep for decades and decades finally break apart and take totally different strategic views of a marketplace. For someone who writes about business, it's great. You can't beat it. And this is what we're going to see.
And not only do you not spend the $35,000 on a Silverado, you never would have spent $35,000 on a Silverado.
Right. So yes,
would have bought something else.
I think the GM bet is that people who are driving either crappy old trucks and we're just simply not in the new car vehicle marketplace, or who are buying cars, will come in and so if you swap a car for a Colorado, that's plus for GM. Because, you know, Cobalt probably less profit per vehicle than the truck. So it's just going to be interesting to see how the reality plays out as opposed to kind of the game.
Well, it's sort of interesting that today also, in addition to the Green Car Award to the or Green Truck Award to the Ram was the fueleconomy.gov came out with the best and worst fuel economy vehicles, and in the small pickup category, the best is the Colorado Canyon, but at 22 miles per gallon, two-wheel drive. But surprising, it ties with the Tacoma, the old Tacoma, and the standard pickup is the Ram diesel at 23 miles per gallon. So you look at the cost differential between, as you were saying, Joe, the comparatively low-cost Colorado and the comparatively premium-priced Eco Diesel in the Chrysler.
Well, and I've always thought of it kind of like the problem you have with pickups is the texification of pickups. That everything has to be bigger.
Yeah.
And that
the texification.
Every dollar, because the truck guys always like to talk about Texas anyway. They always say that 1 in 5 pickups are sold in Texas and blah blah blah. But I think that one of the things that you really notice with the Colorado and the Canyon, this last generation of trucks, Silverado, Ram, and Ford, they're huge.
Yeah.
I mean, Ford has an escalator off the tailgate now to get into the into the truck.
Well, it's true, and so I used to own and drive a Dodge Dakota. It was then a Dodge Dakota. And this is how I felt about it, because I said, I was at a stage where, for whatever reason, I thought, I want to drive a pickup truck, so I want to have. And I looked and I said, well, maybe I'll buy a F-150 or something like that. And even then, this is a decade ago, I said, that's ridiculous. It's just too big. I'm only 5'8" on a good day. I mean, I have to get a ladder to climb in it. So I just couldn't do it. So the Colorado actually makes sense to me as a product. I mean, I don't look at it like some people look at, I don't want that. No, I look at it and say, I know exactly who your target customer is. It's me.
Sure it is. Because if you go back, 20 years ago with the Ranger, the S10, S15, the Japanese pickups, the Dakota and all that, that segment was 1.5 million units. It was big. Today, it's maybe 300,000.
Yeah.
Right. So what Chevy and GM, I should say, is betting on is that they can grow that segment.
Go out to California. Look at all of the pool cleaners, all these really small businesses. They are going to drive those Toyotas.
Drive up and down the beach and look at the surfers.
The recreational aspect
they're going to drive those cars till the wheels fall off because they don't want a giant truck.
Yeah, they don't want to get bigger.
Yeah.
Okay, let me throw this out. Rum and Coke says that Ford is trying to seize the future. The other guys are trying to just meet regulations. What do you think about that?
I think the aluminum is something that I don't think that they're going to realize all the benefits this first model year coming out. I think that the aluminum construction, the technology they develop is going to help Ford throughout its entire lineup.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the correspondent is right. I think Ford has made a big bet on sort of a big leap. And you're right. It's going to go across their lineup, certainly into their SUVs. I guess, it's a little harsh to say that GM and Chrysler aren't, also trying to seize the future. They're just going at it in a more conservative way. I mean, Mark Royce has talked about sort of this multi-material strategy, right? They're joining different materials and not just putting all your eggs into a single metal. And that kind of makes sense to me. I think execution is it's all in the execution, how they do it.
Sure, Ford's the F-Series is the best-selling truck by far. And GM wasn't going to beat it by building a lighter truck than the F-150. They had to do something totally different. And that's like, let's pull an end run on them and come out with a smaller truck.
Yeah, and Ford has been adamant that it doesn't want a Ranger here.
Yeah.
And their Global Ranger is a really good truck. Mm-hmm. To me, that you get over capable, that the trucks can do so much. You know, that you have a truck that what are those? The full size trucks are now 12,000 pounds of towing they can do. Nobody tows 12,000 pounds that drives that truck.
Very few.
Yeah.
Very, yeah. And they all admit that.
And if you tow that, you have a 250.
But it's like buying a 200-mile-an-hour Ferrari. You're not going to go 200 miles an hour, but you want to tell everybody, my car can go 200 miles an hour. You want to tell everybody, I can tow 14,000 pounds.
I can tow a trailer full of rodeo boys.
And I also think consumer attitudes have changed to they're not always buying the what if. What if I have to tow 13,000 pounds? They're like, well, you know what? I'll go down to Home Depot and rent a F-150 and then I'll tow it.
I still think they're buying on the what if.
There's some. I think that though that there's people now that can say, that's enough. Truck.
You know, a car is a dream. It's a means to these fantasies that you have, that you're going to drive across the great open West with your family and have vacations and tow the horses or the motors.
Sean, are you telling me I'm not?
Well, if you buy a Veyron, you're going to have 10 miles per gallon. So you're not if you have a Bugatti.
Well, there's more dreams that are going to have to come true before I get one of those. So.
Okay, more SWOT analysis coming up after the break.
Have you seen what's been happening with our other shows? Here's this week's auto lineup. On the product side, we told you about speculation that the Mexican Ram 700 might be crossing the border legally if this whole mid-size truck thing takes off here in the States. Meanwhile, Ford's Mark Fields is worth a lot more than we thought, at least when a charity is concerned. Check out what one lucky bidder donated for dinner with the CEO. And then there's that strange soccer story about how free Chevy cars, specifically Camaros and Corvettes, are being ignored by English athletes. For more details on these stories and others, check out our website or click on our YouTube channel. And don't forget our latest episode of Autoline This Week, where we meet the man responsible for those
That's no Buick!
ads. All that and more on Autoline.tv.
Hey, that was just a promo for our Autoline This Week, coming up this week with Duncan Aldred, head of sales for Buick and GMC. And we're selling transcripts to those shows right now for only $1.99. But wait, there's a special deal going. If you go in and use the promo code AFTER, you can get 50% off that $1.99 transcript price. So go check it out. It's another way of consuming media. So what else? We said more SWOT analysis.
Let's switch from trucks. Okay, I think a real weakness right now with General Motors is Cadillac. And, I mean, they're down for the year. They're down for the month. They're just reading.
Still sitting on piles of cars.
So what's going to happen there?
Well, look, I mean, it's not. I mean, it's obviously they kind of drove themselves into a cul-de-sac on the sedan side of their business. I mean, the Escalade side of the business is doing just great, and that's not a small thing. But yeah, the ATS and the CTS, new cars, sort of the whole new direction. They're both great cars. I drove this CTS recently, and if they would just take the Q system out of it, as a number of people, and I think including Scott, I think you had one of these. If they would take that out of it and put in, you know, a 1950s style push-button radio with big knobs, the thing would be a great. Anyway, but look, these are good cars, but they are up against brutal competition. They overbuilt them. Now they're sitting on quite a large number of them, which they're going to have to clear out somehow and rectify the situation. And then, and Johan Denishen has talked about this, and then I think they have to kind of reboot their marketing, not just in terms of advertising message, or well, their ads, last raft of ads were not particularly successful, but in just sort of the ground game, you know, at the dealership, you know, how do they package the cars, how do they price the cars, all of that, and they've just started. But I'm sure it's got to be terribly frustrating to everybody at GM that they bring out these two new cars, the ATS and the CTS, that are objectively good cars, and somehow or another they manage to kind of miss the target. And so we'll see what they do.
So I read there's a analyst organization, Innovev, INOVEV, headline, can Cadillac exist in the premium car market? And it breaks it down, basically saying, maybe not. And I hadn't realized its U.S. sales has dropped 50% in the last 10 years.
You know, I keep coming back to 2 years ago, they put a lobbyist in charge of Cadillac. And everyone's scratching their head going, what happened to Cadillac? I can tell you exactly what happened. They put somebody in charge who knew nothing about the business. And this is why they went out and got Johan de Nysschen. Another thing, Audi has surpassed Cadillac in the American market this year. I think there's no looking back. But it's very interesting when you compare the number of models. Cadillac sells 7 different models in the U.S. market. Audi sells 12. BMW sells 15. Mercedes sells 16.
And if you count all the variants within those broad model lines, you're up into the dozens and scores of cars to choose from.
And I thought we'd get into some of the SWOT analysis for the mass market brands. Some of them have too many models. Lincoln and Cadillac just don't have enough. And part of their problem, of course, is they're going up against brands, Audi, BMW, Mercedes, that sell on a global basis. So they can afford to bring in these little slow-selling variants that don't look very good if you look at their sales only in the U.S. But if you look at it on a global basis, you go, hey, no kidding, they're making money on this thing.
I just drove the GLA. Oh, jeez, I'm sorry.
That's for you.
I got a penalty?
No.
I just drove the GLA, the Mercedes GLA, the
Did you get the AMG version? What a blast, huh?
It's a blast. But if you step back from it, and you say, "Come on,
it's outrageous."
It's outrageous. It's like it's a $60,000 hot hatch, and it's a Mercedes. It's well done. It's fine. But it seems like something that very few people in the United States are going to buy, really. But as you say, it doesn't matter. We'll get a few. They'll get some people into the brand with it. But most of them we sold in China and Europe, and that's fine. So, right, they have a different footprint.
So they paid for the tooling over there and whatever they sell over here.
The number one selling AMG for Mercedes is the G-Wagon in the U.S.
In the U.S.
You want to talk about a completely ridiculous vehicle, and it is so awesome at the same time.
Right. Right. But you're right. I mean, I think that for Cadillac and Lincoln, I mean, I think they can find a survivable niche or maybe a little bit bigger than a niche in the China and U.S. markets, but it's going to be a fight. And the Audi revival does not make that easier.
For me, I think that Cadillac, I think the quality of its vehicles, Q aside, is on par with the BMWs and Mercedes that are out there and the Audis. I think that it needs to be 10% less.
10% less
price. I think that they go, look, we finally were as good as this car. The ATS can take on the 3 Series. And you're like, yes, but it needs to be 10% less than a 3 Series because any of those customers that are going to waver back and forth, well, should I get the ATS or the 3 Series? Which Cadillac should be happy that it's in the conversation. They're not going to do it for the same price.
But that's a dangerous thing, because when you play in the luxury segment, people don't want to brag about buying the cheapest luxury car. They almost don't want that to be known that, well, I got this because it's cheaper. Well, this is what killed the Tata Nano. Totally different argument.
Yeah, okay, but I'm going to push back on that because I think remember when Lexus came debuted on the market, their proposition, among other things, was we're going to give you a car that's every bit as good as an S or an E class, the 400, and at a fraction of the price. Now, the fraction was not like, half, it was 2/3 or whatever, but it was considerably less because I think, they recognized that hey, who knows what we are? Well, they established themselves, and now I don't know, I can't do the pricing off the top of my head, but I suspect that their pricing is pretty close nowadays because they moved it up as they gained acceptance and credibility. And I guess I agree with Scott that's, Cadillac.
It's an incentive.
See, I wouldn't cut the price. I would just throw that much more content on.
I think that's what they're going to do.
I disagree.
Free 4G LTE for the life of the car, free maintenance,
I never think that works very well. I think that when you do all of those things, that at the end of the day, when they're looking on a computer and they start looking at prices and they go, this is 42 and this one's 37, I'll take the 37 one because it looks nice, and when I look at reviews, it's done well, and and especially for people that are stepping up into luxury class. And the competition's only getting stiffer. The C-Class is a great car.
Yeah, I'm driving one right now. It's really impressive.
And
I mean, culturally, it's a huge cognitive dissonance for Cadillac to sort of accept that they're the brand that has to reprice in order to compete. They were the standard of the world, and
all right.
in the market they're not.
So with that thought, I'm going to combine two of these. So guest 804 says Cadillac needs to have more unique styling from one model to the next and have more interesting names. And then Dan the Man says, this is what my friend said. I think 2015 will be a big year for Lincoln. Sales momentum of this year should easily continue with Navigator and MKC sales continue to climb. MKX coming online. Black Label getting attention. MKS and Aviator reveals, and I believe the fresh Aviator?
is that Stefan?
And I believe that's the PR guy for
Lincoln.
For Lincoln, freshened MKZ. If Cadillac continues to slide, I would say Lincoln will catch them by spring. What do you guys think?
No.
So number one, styling and names of Cadillac.
I agree with styling. There is. I mean, Audi does pretty well with the family resemblance throughout all its vehicles, and Cadillac. I think that science and technology has kind of run the course, and we're starting to see some more variations of that. Other than the ATS Coupe, which I think is beautiful, but I could see wanting more variation in there. The names. That's one where I don't care.
Who's got better names anymore? I mean, hardly. They're all alphanumerics. I mean,
They are.
So what about Lincoln? Will Lincoln catch Cadillac?
I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I will say that Lincoln, the folks who were planning the Lincoln strategy were smart to bring in a reasonably good-looking, compact, luxury branded SUV, because that, first of all, it's obviously important for the Chinese market, which is important to Lincoln, but it's also, I think, doing pretty well for them in this market. So, the more SUVs Lincoln can bring, the better for them, for the same reasons we were talking earlier.
Yeah.
That's why Audi overtook Cadillac is SUVs. Q5, Q7.
Yeah. Well, like I said, 12 models for Audi versus 7 for Cadillac. It's that.
Yeah, and the MKC is an all-new model, so that's only helps their numbers.
So John, do you think that the volume brands have too many?
I do. I do.
So who has too many cars?
Well, I'll give you an example here. Toyota has 15 models total, car and truck and utilities. Ford has 15 models. Chevy has 17. Nissan's got 19. And when I look at Chevy, I would axe the SS. I love the car. I think it's terrific. I mean, year to date, they've sold 2,300 cars.
Wow, that's it.
Okay,
115 in October.
Okay.
The Caprice, year to date, 3,500 cars. Don't even waste your time. Put your effort into where you can get volume. I look at Nissan, 19 models.
Caprice?
Do they make that?
Yeah, that's the cop car.
The cop version of the Impala?
Right.
Okay.
They're helping out Holden. That's what the SS and the Caprice is all about. They're helping out Holden. But, I look at Nissan. The Cube, that thing is sales proof. The 370Z, they can't give those things away. The Quest minivan is abysmal. Even when you look at the Titan and the Armada, they're not really, they're barely 1,000 a month. Now, I understand they want to turn that around, and I wouldn't give up on those two yet. But, yeah, there's a lot of...
19 models with 8 points of market share is a lot.
Too many models.
It's a lot of models. And I mean, I kind of subscribe, I have subscribed for a long time to the view that in any given segment, if your product is not at least, in the top 3, the step from number 3 down to number 4 is usually pretty large in terms of volume. And if you're number 5 or 6 in terms of consideration, or you're really in trouble. And you have to ask yourself, what are we up to?
Hey, we got a couple of phone calls and other questions that are coming in here. Ben, why don't we go to one of the phone calls first?
John, Bruce Hubbard again at Auto Advisor Group, APM member, IMPA member, and SAMA member. The Colorado and the other vehicles make a lot of sense, like Scott's Burgess is stating.
Smart guy.
The reason is I've already talked to 15 insurance companies, and they already said that with the Ford F-150 all aluminum, they're going to charge more money for anybody who buys those vehicles. Do you have any comment on that? Bruce Hubbard, bye.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Insurance costs of the aluminum F-150, you think insurance costs are going to go up?
Ding costs, it's harder to ding, costs more to fix it.
Well, I guess
if I were an insurance company, it'd be a hell of an excuse, right?
Yeah.
I don't.
Fancy
this
material.
is
I gotta
actually a
raise
question. Did insurance rates go up on the Range Rover when it converted to aluminum? As Jaguar's gone to
What
aluminum?
would be the insurance rates of a Range Rover?
I don't think the buyer of a
I'm
Range
not sure the aluminum skin is the real issue with that. But I mean, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. I know that Ford and some dealers I've talked to have suggested that that's an overblown concern. But you don't know until you know. I mean, and I think the insurance companies ultimately will go on experience. If Ford and its service repair tool providers and their dealers can figure out a way to repair these things without busting the bank, it'll be fine. And if they don't, then it's going to be a problem.
So is Ford promising that we can keep the same mechanics and we can keep our same insurance plans?
They haven't promised that at all. They haven't mentioned that at all. Look, you got to look at the total cost of ownership, right? So maybe your insurance costs go up, but your fuel costs go down.
Yeah, but now we have less than $3 a gallon.
Yeah. So you're not saving as much as you would have, but yeah. But I'd say look at the total cost.
Certainly, you don't have to work too hard to get people at GM to talk about that issue.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to look into that. I'm going to have to look and see what happened to insurance rates on Range Rovers when they converted to aluminum.
Don't limit yourself to just this question, because the whole issue of insurance is a show in and of itself.
Oh, good point, Joe.
I mean, the cost for insurance, especially in our state and other states, is amazing. And what happens if the crash prevention technology actually works? Will that bring the rates down? Good now.
Yeah.
Go up.
So we didn't beat up on Tesla. So let's be in these closing moments.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, we got a bunch of questions? Okay.
Get one that asks about Tesla.
Cover it that way.
Let's see. Dion from Georgia says, I'm so confused about the size classes of CUVs. I thought the Lincoln MKC was considered a compact CUV, but it keeps getting called a subcompact.
Oh, God.
No, it's a compact.
Yeah, the Encore would be subcompact.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I agree.
And the new Chevy Trax that comes out.
Yeah.
AAH guest, is that 804, says, Gary, no one ever says that Cadillac's problem is that all the cars look the same. People are tired of the styling.
Well, and I think that's Scott.
Yeah, I think that was Scott's point.
Yeah. Buzzard wants to know, does everyone else go to aluminum, or does the steel industry respond with an answer?
I think they've already got the answer.
Which is?
Ultra high strength steel. But again,
What about nano steel?
well, arguably that's a variant thereof. So
Okay.
so basically a lot of these new high strength steels, they're actually alloying it at the molecular level, which is not the nano level, of course. But so basically that's how they're making this stuff. But that raises a whole bunch of problems in and of itself, because it doesn't weld the same, it doesn't stamp the same, just as aluminum requires new.
So for folks who argue that regulation is a job killer, let me offer to you CAFE, because all of the innovation, all of the engineering effort, all of the tool development effort that is going to go into complying with CAFE in this industry, nano steel has to be developed, aluminum has to be welded, you have to figure out how to. There's an enormous amount of effort going into this. It's just employing engineers and tool designers and everybody else, out to the end of the time.
Absolutely.
And all those costs are passed on directly to the consumers.
Oh, but you should be happy to support their efforts, Scott. Come on.
Well, the other question is that think about how much manufacturing has changed already, and it seems to be increasing the speed in which we see change. All of the stampings now, with all the different levels, the layers and thicknesses of steel, and the things that they can do with steel, and they may not be able to do with some of the aluminum. And then eventually, I guess they'll start doing it with aluminum. But I'm always impressed when you get into some of those things, the way that they can change the thickness of any kind of stamping, and you're like, man.
So when your kid comes and says, "I want to be a materials scientist," you can say, "That's great."
Yeah.
Right. Hey, we got a question here from Buzzard. I'm not sure I totally understand this. He says, does Cadillac need to be separated from Chevy to succeed? Do customers need a separate boutique dealership to feel good about their car?
Yes.
Well, I think that's happening. That's certainly the direction in all but I would think the smallest markets.
Yeah.
That's been happening. I mean, the separating the showrooms, certainly separating the product. I mean, there's no more Cimarron or any of that stuff going on. I mean, well, not quite. I guess the
luxury car customers need trumpets to sound when they come into the.
Yeah, well, I'm guessing Buzzard might live in a rural area because I don't know of
old
any
Cadillac, Chevy
Metros. Well, it's certainly that. I mean, that's the impression I got from talking to Johan is that they're not going to have, they're going to have unique Cadillac stores with unique presentations in the whole, and everybody's doing that. That's not just a Cadillac thing. They're all doing that.
Well, look, this is probably a good place to wrap up. We'll save the Tesla discussion for another time, but yeah.
Right. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It just went up $3.
Right. How many times did we mention it? Say it again and it'll go up.
Thank heaven those negativists didn't say anything I'm going to buy.
That's right. Thank God I didn't go out and short the stock. Right. Anyway, Scott Burgess, thanks for stopping by,
Thanks
man.
for having me.
Great having you. Joe, great having you here as always, too. And
Make it 3 in a row next week.
Let's make it 3 in a row. Let's do the show next week, too. Cool. Hey, we want to thank all of you for having tuned in.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone. Your journey, our passion.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern. Get your daily news fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There is all that and much more at Autoline.tv.